A conservative and famously durable automaker like Honda has just sent shockwaves through the industry. After nearly 70 years without reporting a single operating loss since 1957, this Japanese giant has now been forced to accept a massive restructuring loss of up to $15.7 billion. But the most shocking part is not the financial numbers themselves. Honda has canceled several of its flagship EV models right before they were scheduled to reach customers, including the Honda Zero Saloon, the Honda Zero SUV, and the all-new Acura RRSX. These were the very vehicles once promoted as the future of the company at Consumer Electronics Show. But barely a year after the flashy debut, the advanced operating systems and the bold promises of surpassing Tesla and Hyundai have completely fallen apart. This was not the failure of just one vehicle. It was the collapse of an entire strategy worth tens of billions of dollars. Is the electric vehicle industry truly growing because of real consumer demand? In this video, we are going to break down why even Honda is starting to turn away from the global EV race. A promising beginning. The CES event, January 2025. At the beginning of 2025, Honda stepped onto the stage at Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas with a very clear ambition, not just to enter the EV market, but to completely redefine the company's image for a new era. That is why Honda introduced two completely new prototypes, the Honda Zero Saloon and the Honda Zero SUV. From the exterior design alone, it was obvious that Honda wanted to separate itself from the traditional IVE approach. CEO Toshihiro Mibe described it as the thin, light, and wise philosophy. In simple terms, thinner, lighter, and smarter. For many years, Honda had been known for practical vehicles, easy maintenance, and a strong focus on traditional mechanical engineering. But at CES 2025, the company started talking far more about AI software and autonomous driving instead of engines or driving feel. The specifications sounded very promising. An 800-volt electrical platform, up to 482 horsepower with a dual-motor AWD system, a target driving range of more than 300 miles under EPA standards. In DC, fast charging from 15% to 80% in only about 10 to 15 minutes. The higher the voltage, the lower the current needed to carry the same amount of power. That helps reduce heat buildup inside the wiring, reduce cable size, and improve fast charging performance. This is also the same direction being pursued by vehicles like the Porsche Taycan and the Hyundai Ioniq 5. But Honda did not stop there. The feature the company emphasized the most was Asimo OS, a completely new operating system running on a 3-nanometer AI chip developed by Renesas Electronics. The system was claimed to deliver up to 2,000 TOPS of processing performance. Their goal was very clear. They wanted to enter the technology war and take down Tesla. Honda even completely redesigned its traditional H logo. The company removed the thick square steel outline and replaced it with a thinner and sharper design to represent a glorious new chapter for the automotive industry. That showed just how serious Honda was about this EV gamble at the time. But that was also the moment when a major problem began to appear. The harder Honda tried to turn the automobile into a technology product, the deeper the company was forced into a battle where traditional mechanical automakers had no real advantage. And barely a year after that ambitious CES debut, the entire dream started collapsing faster than anyone could have imagined. The first cracks and the systemic collapse. The collapse of Honda's EV project was not some sudden accident. It was the inevitable result of deep systemic cracks that the company had spent years trying to hide from the public. On December 23, 2024, three major Japanese automakers, Nissan, Honda, and Mitsubishi Motors, signed a historic memorandum of understanding. The goal was to establish a shared parent company through a stock swap agreement. Their objective was very clear: combine all resources to reduce EV development costs, from chassis platforms, battery systems, software, operating systems to electronic architecture. The plan was to create the world's third largest automotive alliance strong enough to compete against BYD from China and Tesla from the United States. In other words, even Japan's biggest automakers already understood one painful reality. At that time, no single company could afford to carry the cost of the EV race alone anymore. Because a modern EV is no longer just a mechanical vehicle. It is a massive computer system powered by lithium batteries, sensors, firmware, and millions of lines of code. But reality shattered that dream very quickly. Less than 2 months later, on February 13, 2025, the alliance officially collapsed. The reason was simple. Those systems were nearly impossible to synchronize across multiple automakers. Once engineers realized that standardizing control software across 3 completely different brands would be extremely expensive and practically unmanageable, they had no choice but to walk away. This was the moment when the financial cracks became impossible to hide. In May 2025, Honda executives were forced to make emergency budget cuts. CEO Toshihiro Mibe made the first major decision: delay the company's 15 billion Canadian dollar EV factory project in Ontario by another 2 years. At the same time, Honda immediately removed $21 billion from its original 10 trillion yen EV investment plan. Instead of targeting 30% EV sales by 2030, the company was forced to reverse direction and focus its remaining resources on hybrid vehicles in order to stabilize the business. But the damage did not stop there. The collapse also created direct consequences for major technology partners. After Honda announced the cancellation of its strategic Zero Series lineup in March 2026, the Sony-Honda mobility partnership immediately fell into paralysis. Only 1 month later, in April 2026, the joint venture officially canceled the Afeela One EAP program. This was once promoted as the future of the intelligent cockpit, a vehicle filled with screens, filled with graphics processors, filled with entertainment features and AI systems. But in the end, it still depended on a hardware platform from Honda just to survive. As financial pressure intensified and software problems continued appearing across prototype vehicles, the entire system seemed to collapse all at once. The massive gamble in the deep EV infrastructure commitment. Honda had already gone too deep into the entire EV infrastructure system before realizing that the real market was not as promising as expected. In May 2024, Honda announced plans to double its investment budget for EVs and software. It became the largest investment program in the company's history, worth up to $64 billion. The company had to rebuild almost the entire industrial ecosystem behind it. First came the batteries. Honda partnered with LG Energy Solution to build a $4.4 billion battery factory in Ohio. The lithium battery cell manufacturing process requires precision that is almost comparable to the semiconductor industry. Even a very small defect inside a battery cell structure can lead to overheating problems or large-scale battery degradation. Honda then spent more than $1 billion upgrading multiple factories across Ohio, including Marysville, East Liberty, and the Anna engine plant. Out of that amount, $700 million was poured directly into 3 core facilities in an effort to turn Ohio into the EV hub of North America. On the surface, that may sound reasonable, but those factories were originally designed for internal combustion vehicles. That meant Honda had to redesign almost the entire production system. You cannot simply remove a gasoline engine and replace it with a battery pack. An EV is significantly heavier because of the lithium battery pack mounted under the floor. That forces the chassis to be reinforced. Even the wiring system becomes far more complicated because it must handle high-voltage electrical systems operating at 400 volts or even 800 volts. Then Honda made an even larger bet in Canada. The company announced a 15 billion Canadian dollar EV supply chain project in Ontario. The Canadian government even pledged around 5 billion Canadian dollars in public subsidies to support the project. Many EV projects today can only survive with massive government subsidies. But once the market started slowing down, everything quickly changed direction. By the middle of 2025, Honda announced a 2-year delay for the Ontario project. And by May 2026, economic reports from Japan confirmed that the project had been frozen indefinitely. That meant the company no longer saw a safe path toward recovering its investment anytime soon. But the most important detail was this. Even after canceling multiple projects, Honda still could not fully escape the EV investment trap. In Japan, the company continued operating its 43 billion yen solid-state battery pilot line in Tochigi, starting in early 2025. Solid-state batteries are viewed by many automakers as the last major hope for EV technology, because in theory they offer higher energy density, lower fire risk, faster charging speeds, and less long-term degradation than traditional lithium-ion batteries. But the problem is simple. This technology still cannot be mass-produced at low cost. That has pushed the entire EV industry into a very dangerous position. Automakers are being forced to keep burning tens of billions of dollars on new infrastructure, while real profits remain unstable. Battery costs are still high, and market demand has started weakening. That is why Honda's collapse is no longer just an isolated decision. It reflects the condition of the modern EV industry as a whole, spending enormous amounts of money on a system that still has not proven it can survive sustainably in the real world. Market conditions, the bloodbath nightmare of the EV industry. Honda is not the only company struggling in the electric vehicle race. The reality is this: nearly the entire global EV industry is burning money at an unprecedented rate. The more EVs many automakers produce, the more money they lose. Ford Motor Company and the loss of more than $132,000 per EV. Ford is one of the clearest examples. In 2024, Ford's Model E division, the branch responsible for electric vehicles, lost about $5.07 billion. That was even worse than the company's $4.7 billion loss in 2023. More importantly, during the first quarter of 2024, reports revealed that Ford was losing roughly $132,000 on every EV it sold. That means every time Ford sold another EV, the company did not make money. It lost even more money. That is why Ford was forced to delay its battery plant project in Kentucky, cancel its three-row electric SUV program, and cut production of the Ford F-150 Lightning by nearly two-thirds. Even CEO Jim Farley admitted that revenue was falling faster than the company could reduce costs. That is an extremely dangerous warning sign for any manufacturing industry, because the auto industry depends heavily on scale to generate profit. A modern assembly line costs billions of dollars to build. If sales volume is not large enough, fixed costs will quickly crush profitability. General Motors, Rivian, and Lucid Motors, the more they sell, the more they lose. General Motors is not in much better shape. Although GM claimed it achieved variable profit positive status by the end of 2024, meaning the company reached positive profit before certain fixed costs were included, the company still lost roughly $2.5 billion overall on its EV business. What is even more notable is this: several EV partnership projects between GM and Honda also started facing criticism for extremely high costs and weak results. But the situation becomes even more serious when looking at pure EV companies. Rivian was reportedly losing more than $30,000 on every vehicle sold. Lucid was even worse. In the third quarter of 2024, Lucid lost as much as $341,604 per vehicle. You are looking at an industry that must constantly burn investment capital just to stay alive. And once interest rates rise, cheap money starts disappearing. That is when these companies immediately begin entering dangerous territory. Stellantis and Volkswagen Group begin pulling back. By 2025, even Europe's largest automotive groups had started struggling badly. Stellantis was no exception. In 2025, the company reported a net loss of up to $22.3 billion. More than $25 billion of costs were directly tied to EV-related investments and expenses. Its electric SUV, the Jeep Wagoneer S, experienced a devastating 93% collapse in sales. American consumers refused to spend money on a battery-powered vehicle that could not tow heavy loads and could not travel long distances comfortably. Even the German giant Volkswagen is facing similar problems. In April 2026, Volkswagen officially discontinued the American-built Volkswagen ID.4 after storage lots became completely overcrowded with unsold inventory. As you can see, this entire industry has pushed itself into a very difficult position. And these problems are not coming from just one automaker. They are coming from the technical and financial structure of the modern EV industry itself. That is why the moment one financial or policy link begins to fail, the entire system immediately comes under chain reaction pressure. And Honda is simply the first major automaker willing to publicly admit that reality through a large-scale retreat. The decisive blow from policy and market conditions. Late 2025 to early 2026. The collapse of Honda's Zero Series lineup was not caused only by internal technical problems. It was also driven by devastating blows from policy changes and market pressure across North America, during late 2025 and early 2026. For many years, the EV market in the United States grew very rapidly, but much of that growth depended heavily on government subsidies. The federal $7,500 tax credit was one of the biggest reasons many consumers accepted the high price of electric vehicles. When an EV cost around $50,000, that subsidy was enough to bring the effective price much closer to a traditional gasoline vehicle. But on September 30th, 2025, that subsidy program began coming to an end, and the market reacted very negatively almost immediately. After a wave of aggressive EV purchases during the third quarter of 2025, EV sales collapsed sharply in the fourth quarter. EV market share in the United States fell from roughly 10.5% down to only 5.8%. Meanwhile, EV inventory reached a record level of around 149 days of supply. By 2026, the situation became even more serious. First quarter EV sales in 2026 fell roughly 27% compared to the same period the year before. This was considered one of the most severe slowdowns in the EV market since the industry's first major growth wave after 2011. The Trump administration began completely changing the government's approach toward the EV industry. In April 2025, the United States imposed 25% import tariffs under Section 232 on many vehicles and components manufactured outside the country. That dramatically increased EV supply chain costs because lithium batteries, rare minerals, and many critical electronic components still depend heavily on global supply chains. The moment logistics costs or import tariffs rise, the already thin profit margins of EVs become heavily squeezed. Looking back at Honda's 30-year history of retreats in the EV market, for more than 3 decades, Honda has repeated the same pattern over and over again. Every time the EV market starts heating up, Honda launches a new project, and then quietly pulls back once real commercial pressure begins appearing. As far back as 1997, Honda introduced the AV Plus. It was one of the first Japanese EVs to use nickel metal hydride batteries instead of traditional lead-acid batteries. But Honda only produced a little more than 300 units through limited lease programs in California. Later, most of those vehicles were recalled and destroyed. That showed from the very beginning that Honda did not view EVs as a safe long-term commercial platform worthy of massive investment. Then in 2013, Honda introduced the Fit EV. After that came the Clarity and Electric in 2017. But both vehicles shared one common characteristic: very limited production volume. They were only released in a small number of states with strict emissions regulations. In the auto industry, these vehicles are often called compliance cars. That means vehicles created mainly to satisfy environmental regulations, not vehicles truly built around natural consumer demand. But the most important part of Honda's modern EV era came later. In 2024, Honda launched the Honda Prologue and the Acura ZDX. Neither vehicle used an EV platform fully developed by Honda itself. Both were built on General Motors' Ultium platform. By early 2026, sales of the Honda Prologue had reportedly fallen by around 65%. Honda was forced to heavily discount the vehicle in order to clear inventory. Meanwhile, the Acura ZDX was also quickly discontinued. That is why many industry analysts have started making a very harsh observation. Honda may still be one of the best automakers in the world when it comes to internal combustion engines and hybrid systems. But over the past 30 years, the company has never truly built a successful EV strategy that was stable, profitable, and fully independent technologically. 8. The lessons learned and the road ahead. When an industry survives mainly through government subsidies, forced regulations, and overly optimistic growth projections, the entire system can reverse direction very quickly. Even Honda was ultimately forced to slam the brakes on an EV strategy worth tens of billions of dollars. That proves one important reality: the real market is always stronger than corporate projections. In the years ahead, Honda will most likely continue shifting back toward hybrid vehicles and safer mechanical platforms in order to stabilize profits. And that is also why more and more people are starting to rediscover the value of older vehicles that are simple, durable, and easy to repair. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications if you want to keep learning the truth behind the modern automotive industry.